Welcome back to the Courtroom. I'm Terry Darrell Caldwell. We have examined white, a political coalition, black, a circular definition enforced by gatekeepers, MENA, a category that took 50 years to add, proving the system runs on convenience, Asian, a statistical fiction that flattens dozens of distinct populations into model minority myth. Today, we turn to the most legally distinct category on the census form. What is Native American? This category is unlike all the others because it is not primarily a racial classification. It is a political and legal status rooted in treaties, sovereignty, in a unique government-to-government relationship with the United States. The prosecution will demonstrate that the government's race box conflates political citizenship with biological ancestry, that the infamous blood quantum requirement is a colonial tool of elimination, and that the very existence of this category exposes the incoherence of treating all race boxes as equivalent. Let us begin. The Office of Management and Budget defines American Indian or Alaska Native as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America, including Central America, and who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. Notice the second clause, who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. This is the only OMB racial category that includes a behavioral or relational requirement. To be counted as Native American, you must not only have ancestry, you must also be connected to a tribe or community. Why? Because the federal government's relationship with Native peoples is based on political sovereignty, not biology. Tribes are domestic dependent nations. They have their own citizenship criteria. The federal government does not get to define who is a tribal citizen. The race box, however, tries to impose a one-size-fits-all biological definition on a political reality, and the result is a mess. The most notorious tool for defining Native identity is blood quantum, the requirement that a person have a certain fraction of Native blood to be recognized as a tribal citizen or to qualify for federal benefits. Blood quantum was invented by the federal government in the 18th and 19th centuries as a tool of elimination through classification. The logic was simple. If you can define Indians out of existence by requiring ever-increasing degrees of pure blood, you can eventually declare the population extinct and terminate treaty obligations. Today, blood quantum requirements vary by tribe. Some require 1/4, some require 1/8, others a half. The result is a patchwork of definitions that have no biological basis. DNA cannot tell you your blood quantum. The concept is a legal fiction, not a genetic reality. The prosecution is not arguing that tribes cannot set their own citizenship criteria. Sovereignty includes that right. The prosecution is arguing that the federal government's use of blood quantum in its conflation with racial classification perpetuates a colonial logic that should have ended generations ago. Consider this. A person who is 1/4 Native by blood quantum and 3/4 European is considered Indian enough by some tribes. A person who is 1/4 Native and 3/4 African may be treated differently. The same fraction, different outcomes. This is not biology. It is policy. The prosecution now presents a key distinction. Tribal citizenship is political, not racial. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that tribes have the authority to determine their own membership, and that the authority flows from their sovereignty, not from the race of their citizens. A tribe could, in theory, enroll a white person who meets its criteria, and some tribes have. The federal race box, however, ignores this distinction. It treats Native American as a biological category, not a political one. It asks individuals to check a box based on ancestry, not on tribal affiliation. The result is that millions of Americans check the box who are not enrolled in any tribe. And many enrolled tribal citizens, particularly those with lighter skin or who do not look Native, are assumed not to be. The box does not capture the reality of indigenous identity. It imposes a colonial framework on a sovereign relationship. We have discussed Nazi racial laws, which defined Jewishness by ancestry using the Nuremberg laws. 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents made you Jewish. 1 or 2 made you mixed race. Blood quantum is the same logic applied to a different population. The goal of the Nazis was to identify and eliminate. The goal of American blood quantum was, for much of history, to identify and assimilate, to breed out the Indian through intermarriage and then declare the race extinct. The prosecution is not equating the scale of atrocities, but the structure is identical. Using fractional ancestry to determine legal status with devastating consequences for identity, community, and survival. If the Nuremberg laws are universally condemned as pseudoscience, why is blood quantum still used by the federal government to determine who is really Native American? The answer is inertia. The colonial inertia is still colonialism. The prosecution now notes an important detail in the proposed Amendment 28. Section 4 of the amendment includes a tribal sovereignty carve-out. It states that nothing in the amendment shall prohibit any federal recognized Indian tribe from determining its own citizenship or enrollment criteria. It also allows the federal government to carry out its trust responsibilities to the tribes. The prosecution supports this carve-out because tribal citizenship is political, not racial. A tribe is not a race. It is a sovereign nation. But the prosecution also notes that the carve-out is narrow. It does not allow the federal government to use Native American as a race proxy for general purpose policies. The census race box, in other words, should be removed. Tribes can still enroll their own citizens. The federal government can still serve those citizens, but the rest of America does not need to check a box. This is the distinction that current law blurs, and blurring benefits no one. Before closing, the prosecution briefly notes that Hispanic is not a racial category at all under OMB rules. It is an ethnicity. Respondents are asked about Hispanic origin separately from race, but in practice, many Hispanics are counted as white or some other race. And the confusion has led to decades of inconsistent data. The prosecution will not dwell on this today. The point is that the system is not only arbitrary, it is also internally contradictory. Hispanic identity is treated as separate from race, even though many Hispanics experience racial discrimination. If the government cannot even decide what counts as race versus ethnicity, then the entire classification system is not a tool of science. It is a confusion generator. Now, the prosecution asked the jury to consider a simple question. If Native American is actually a political and legal status, not a biological race, if the government uses blood quantum, a colonial tool, to define who qualifies, if tribes themselves have sovereign authority to determine their own citizenship, and if Amendment 28 properly carves out that sovereignty while abolishing the general race box, then on what authority does the government ask any citizen to check that box? The answer is the same as for all the other boxes. No authority, only habit, only inertia, only the convenience of bureaucrats who do not want to redesign the forms. The prosecution does not deny that Native peoples have a unique history in relationship with the United States. The history should be honored, but honoring it does not require a checkbox. It requires policy, treaties, and sovereign respect, not a bubble on a census form. In our next episode, we will examine what is other. The 15% of Americans who check some other race on the census, and what that category tells us about the failure of the entire classification system. But for today, the prosecution rests on count 6. The Native American category conflates political sovereignty with biological race, perpetuates the colonial tool of blood quantum, and ignores the reality of tribal self-determination. The proposed amendment's carve-out respects tribal sovereignty while abolishing the race box. The current system does neither. If the only racial category with a distinct legal and political status is still incoherent, then the entire classification system is not just arbitrary, it is colonial architecture. And colonial architecture can be dismantled. Court will reconvene for episode 7. What is other?